The other thing is, for today's class, I'm going to have to give you some information that is really boring, but is necessary for you to understand how other parts of the class fit together. First point. Second point, and this will be the last time I remind you, make notes. Do the reading before the class, then you know what extra information I give that's not in the textbook, and also extra subjects which I will be slipping in as well. Well, I'm starting off with, unfortunately, this horrible little bit of background history, but it's important to know some of this so that you can understand some of the art of the period. And we start off by making a mention of the fact that Octavian, or Augustus, as he became known after 27 BC, had always suffered from ill health. He was a hypochondriac. He was convinced he was going to die the next day. He fully expected to die at a relatively young age, before he was 50 or something like that. He was very concerned about the fact he had a daughter but no son. And it seems that he was worried that once he died, then who would take over this new system of government, the Principate? Who would become princeps? Who could take his place to guarantee peace and prosperity for the Roman Empire? So in 25 BC, when he was actually quite seriously ill, he arranged a marriage between his daughter, Julia, and Marcellus. Marcellus is his nephew. It's quite common for people to do a fair bit of intermarriage to a certain extent anyway. Marcellus then goes through a period of rapid promotion. It's quite obvious that what Augustus is hoping, one, that they're going to have children, and two, that if Augustus suddenly dies, Marcellus can take over from him. And the theatre of Marcellus is named for Marcellus as well. But less than 2 years later, 23 BC, Marcellus dies suddenly. So Augustus goes, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? 2 years after that, in 21 BC, he says to Julia, you're going to marry Agrippa. Agrippa, you're going to get divorced. Oh, okay, I'll do that. Agrippa. Augustus' best general, very much his best friend, his advisor in many ways. He now gets married to Julia, and much to Augustus' joy, Julia gave birth to a boy called Gaius in 20 BC and a second boy called Lucius in 17 BC. Both of these boys are now officially adopted by Augustus as his grandsons. You can see what he's trying to arrange. If he suddenly dies, well, Agrippa will be in a position to look after the grandsons until they become old enough for one of them, Gaius, the older, to become princeps in Augustus' place. But then a little spanner gets in the works, as we call it. In 13 BC, Agrippa dies suddenly. Augustus needs somebody else to take after the children, to look after the children, to guarantee this idea of security. So what he says to Julia is, you're going to marry Tiberius. Tiberius is the son of Augustus' second wife from a previous marriage. Augustus' wife Livia, Tiberius, her elder son from a previous marriage, so he's stepson to the Emperor Augustus. His full name is Tiberius Claudius Nero, but we call him Tiberius, so you don't confuse him with Tiberius Claudius Nero, who is Claudius, and Tiberius Claudius Nero, who is Nero. So there's a whole series of these Tiberii Claudii Nerones. So we just refer to him as Tiberius. Well, Tiberius is one of Rome's most successful generals. The only problem is Augustus doesn't really like him, but Augustus knows that he's probably the best person to look after Gaius and Lucius while they grow up. There is a second slight problem though. Tiberius is already married. So Augustus does his usual business, divorce your wife, you're going to marry Julia. Tiberius deeply loves his wife and he's got a son by his wife, a boy called Drusus. But he has to do what Augustus tells him. And as you can imagine, the marriage is not exactly a success between Julia and Tiberius. And in fact, in 6 BC, after 5 or 6 years fighting on the German frontier, when Tiberius comes back to Rome, he says, that's it, I'm going to go and live on the island of Rhodes. I don't want to live with Julia. Well, Tiberius probably expected to spend the rest of his life on the island of Rhodes, but then in the year AD 2, Gaius suddenly dies. That's one grandson gone. Then in the year AD 4, Lucius dies. Augustus, right, is trying to find some way to secure the Roman Empire. So he said to Tiberius, you come back to Rome right now, I'm going to adopt you as my son, even though I absolutely hate you. But you have also got to adopt your nephew, so Germanicus, so that you've got 2 sons. You see what Augustus is trying to do? He's trying to make certain there's at least 2 possible successors all the time. Gaius and Lucius, boom, they die. So now he's working on Drusus and Germanicus like this. Well, Tiberius has to basically do what he's told. So Tiberius is in effect next in line to become princeps. He now has to spend much more time dealing with the organisation of the Roman Empire. He doesn't really like Augustus. Augustus doesn't really like him either. And that might be one of the reasons why in the year AD 10, Augustus says, why don't you go off and deal with the Germans? They're a bit of a problem. Go on, off you go. Perhaps you might get killed on the way. You can always hope. And that's precisely what Tiberius does. He takes an army to the Rhine and the Danube, he crosses into Germany, and he spends 2 years fighting the Germans, returning to Rome in AD 12, which is when he was given a triumph. A triumph, the formal victory procession for a very good Roman general. Now this is probably what we find celebrated on the Boscorial cups. This, by the way, is an adoption portrait of Tiberius when he changed his name to Tiberius Julius Caesar from Tiberius Claudius Nero. The Boscorial cups, just to remind you, and I found this old picture hidden away in my files. I didn't have enough time to work on it properly. But remember, the one Boscorial cup shows Augustus sitting on a chair holding a globe, the symbol of the world. There are a series of barbarian people kneeling before him, surrendering. You've got that tall person there who's probably meant to be Tiberius, come to think of it. But these would be meant to be Germans. The scene continues, that's the same globe there. So you see the captive Germans coming in here, Roman soldiers behind the guards there, a woman carrying her baby there. And then the scene continues around this side. We've got the god Mars, and Roma, Venus, all the other gods all coming in to celebrate the whole thing. On that front, you have the victory being given by Venus to Augustus and so forth. Boscorial Cup number 2 represents a triumphal scene. Remember, this is somebody in a triumph, so this will be Tiberius, almost certainly, the year AD 12, celebrating his triumph over the Germans. The slave behind him, reminding him he is mortal, is at the head of a procession of animals which are going to be taken for the sacrifice. Notice that triangular crown on the bull. We'll see the same type of thing a little bit later. And here you see the sacrifice ceremony, the altar representing the symbol of Apollo, and then the sacrifice of the bull in front of the Capitoline Temple. Well, it's another object of the same general period which is related to this scene, and this is what's discussed in the textbook at this point. This is something we know as the Gemma Augustea. It's a piece of onyx, a natural rock that comes in different layers, different colours. It's a big piece of onyx. I showed you this briefly in the last class. 19 by 23 centimetres. This is really quite a massive piece. It's broken on that corner, but I'll come back to that later. The Gemma Augustea, as you can see, the top layer of the onyx has been carved in a cameo fashion. The top layer being white, the bottom layer being black. The porcelain vase is glass. Blue glass with white glass over it. This is onyx. This is a natural rock. What we have on this is a scene, or two separate scenes. We've got two registers, if you like, two areas of decoration. The bottom area of decoration is this here. This represents Tiberius's victory over the barbarians. The victory in AD 12. What we have here is a typical Roman victory scene. At the end of a successful battle, the Romans would erect what they called a trophy. A trophy was a tree trunk that was cut down, or actually a living tree. It was decorated with the captured weapons, the shields, the helmets of the defeated people, and pulled upright so that you could see this as a victory symbol. Here we have two sets of prisoners, male and a female both side, while this male is sitting down by that large chunk of armour there. Well, that's Roman armour in that specific case, but the long hair, the long beard, the woman in that typical pose of, oh, woe is me, we've been defeated, we'll all be slaves. And you can see that the man has actually got his hands tied behind his back. He's probably got his feet tied together as well. On this side, two Roman soldiers bringing in two more captive barbarians. Again, the long hair, the long beard, the baggy trousers, characteristic of the German peoples, and he's wearing a neck ornament, a torque. The torque is a characteristic neck ornament of Iron Age peoples in Britain and Europe. Gold or bronze. I don't think there are any silver ones, but this tells us, apart from the beard and the long hair, that these are Germans here. Rather interestingly, one of these soldiers has got a Macedonian type helmet, so it's sort of kind of referring back to earlier Greek art. And there's a lot of argument as to whether this is actually a woman or a man, because it does seem to, and the figure does seem to have a large bun at the back. But no doubt about what we have here, a group of Roman soldiers lifting up the trophy to celebrate the victory. The upper register is a bit more detailed, a bit more difficult to understand. Broadly speaking, it represents Tiberius returning to Rome to be met by Augustus. This is Tiberius in his chariot. We have a description of the actual return given, which supplied by Suetonius. But this upper register mixes in an awful lot of different symbols to represent different aspects of Augustus. It conveys a propaganda message. Well, here's Augustus sitting down, his feet on a shield, symbolising a military victory. At his feet, there's the eagle. The eagle is the symbol of Jupiter. Augustus is holding a large staff or a rod. This is a typical Jupiter pose. This is how Jupiter is often shown. Augustus is also shown half naked. This is a common way of expressing divinity or godlike nature. So we actually have Augustus being shown as Jupiter. He's personified, if you like, as Jupiter. Next to him is Roma, the goddess Roma. The goddess Roma is very much like the goddess Athena in many ways, but there are differences in the helmet and differences in the armour that she wears. So Roma sharing in the joy of the victory with Augustus. Well, Roma is the personification of Rome. So she symbolises that Rome and the Roman people, we are on equal terms with Augustus in celebrating this victory. But she's shown the same size. So they're both equal gods in a sense. Now over here, and I don't think the textbook explains these figures terribly well, so we need to look at these in a bit more detail. This one over here, this lady over here, who is holding a wreath, the victory wreath, over Augustus's head. Well, this actually represents the ecumene in Latin, which means the universal world, the universal peace. So she's symbolizing the victory of Augustus. The people of the world, all the known peoples of the world, are sharing in this victory. Behind her is this rather hairy-looking figure, and even I have to look at my notes for this type of thing. Well, we can't quite be certain who this. Sorry. We can't quite be certain who this is, but it's most likely a bearded, long-haired person, half naked, so probably a god of some kind. The god we most often associate with the beard and long hair is Neptune, Poseidon, the god of the seas. Well, that would make sense. Ecumene, the civilized world, the earth; Neptune, the seas; Augustus, the ruler of the seas. The lady down here, she's holding that cornucopia. So she's got to be Tellus or Fortuna or something like that. Cornucopia. And the cornucopia, the sign of prosperity, fertility, and you can see she's got these two little fat boys running around here, nice and chubby and fat. Have any of you ever read that wonderful satire by, I think it was Jonathan Swift or Daniel Defoe, about the way to solve the overpopulation in Ireland in the 18th century was to take all the nice little fat Irish babies and cook them. It's a satire, but many people believe that he wrote it really meaning it. But anyway, nice little fat babies, good times ahead. So you've got a lot of symbolism involved in all over here, and then we come to this, the Capricorn. The Capricorn is a zodiac symbol which some of you will be familiar with. This might be a reference to the date when Augustus was conceived. Tradition has it that he was conceived on the 25th of December. Well, you know, that's the middle of the year, 25th or 23rd of December. It's the turning point in the year, so it's the beginning of a new year. Alternatively, it might refer to the fact that he was given the title Augustus on the 23rd of December by the Senate, because the Capricorn has long been a symbol of royalty, of a ruler, something like that. In Roman tradition, the Capricorn is associated with Jupiter, and it's the symbol, if you like, of a God-given person. So everything over here has got a God-related theme to it. I didn't mention, incidentally, that little curved stick that Augustus is holding in his hand there. This is the letus. The letus is the symbol of the chief priest of Rome. So all these things come together in this rather semi-divine state here. Well, what have we got over here? And this is why now you know why you had to go through that a little bit at the beginning. Well, somebody's stepping off a chariot, returning to Rome in victory. He's wearing the laurel wreath of a victorious general. Behind him, the person driving the chariot is actually winged, so this is Victoria victory. So Augustus, this has to be Tiberius, that type of thing. Who's this standing here, though? Well, actually, there are two other figures here. You just got the end of the hand of another figure over there. You just see the hand curving round like that. This has been broken. So there has to be another figure over there. Most logically, what we have here is Germanicus and Drusus. Now you see why you had to learn about all this other bit. Because what this upper register symbolises, it's a propaganda statement. It's the sort of God-given nature of Augustus, Augustus's rule over Rome, over the Roman Empire, the peace and prosperity it's brought. It's advertising the fact that Tiberius is his adopted son, intended to be his successor as princeps, but really the successors, the princeps to be, will be Germanicus or Drusus. So that's what all this symbolism comes in here for, and that's why you had to go through that first part. What the Gemma Augustae tells us, it's a propaganda statement. It's celebrating Tiberius' victory over the Germans, but Augustus is shown Jupiter-like. He's a person who's favoured by the gods, favoured by Roma. He's ended years of civil war. He's brought peace and prosperity to the known world, ecumeny, peace to the seas and trade and that sort of thing. That's why we have Neptune there. He's brought in a time of prosperity, which is why we have the cornucopia, Fortuna or Tellus there. The wreath that he's actually being crowned with is not a laurel wreath of victory, it's an oak leaf wreath, which means that this is Corona Civica, the civil crown, which was given to a Roman who saved the lives of other Romans. So this is a reference to the end of civil war. The future prosperity of the reign, the security of the reign, is guaranteed by Tiberius, and after Tiberius, Germanicus and Drusus will take over as well. So you see that, you know, everything within this particular gem ties in with the Boscoriale cups, in a sense. It's advertising and confirming Tiberius's place as Augustus's successor. You can see it in that particular way. Well, I started off this class by saying that Augustus was a hypochondriac. Oh, you know, slight temperature, sort of, I'm going to die tomorrow, I've got to wrap up well. The sort of person who wouldn't go to sleep at night with the window open in case he caught a cold. Right? Fresh air is good for you. He died in AD 14, 75 years old. The average lifespan at this particular time, well, when a Roman male reached the age of 62, he thought, any year after this, it's a year from the gods. So, and Augustus dies at the age of 75. The Senate immediately confirms Tiberius as princeps. Tiberius, remember, was born Tiberius Claudius Nero. The middle part of the name is his family name. So he's a Claudian by birth. He's been adopted by Augustus. He becomes Tiberius Claudius Caesar. He and the three emperors who come after him are all Claudians by birth. So we talk about these four emperors as the Julio-Claudian emperors. They're emperors who have family links directly with the Claudian family, indirectly, usually by adoption, to the Julian family. Well, as soon as Tiberius becomes princeps, the Roman tradition was to immediately send out new portraits of the new emperor so everybody could see what he looked like. And what we see is, again, art being used as propaganda. Tiberius is the stepson of Augustus. There's no blood link. And people must have been aware of that. But what we find happening with portraits of this period, of the imperial family, is that they all rather idealized and share certain similarities to link them all with each other, to suggest that they're actually directly related. Well, we see this to a certain extent in the shape of the eyes of Tiberius over there, and there's the young Augustus, this general similarity. The faces are slightly different, but there's a general similarity. But look at this. This is the key point. The hairstyle. The hairstyles of all these Julio Claudians are basically the same. They're shown the same to make people think that they are all related. What have we got here? Spot the similarities, spot the dissimilarities. Gaius and Lucius, Drusus and Germanicus. They've all got this slightly more Tiberian look there, but look, see, he's got that little curve coming in there. They've all got this kind of Augustan hairstyle that's meant to represent or indicate that they do have a direct link with each other. And we'll see this coming up again and again with the Julio Claudians. Well, Tiberius was to be emperor for 23 years or so, and it was generally a pretty peaceful time throughout most of the Roman Empire, except in South Gaul. Gaul, the Roman name for France, the area around Arusio, Orange, in the southern part of modern France. In the year 21, the local tribe decided to rebel against Roman rule. A short war took place, and the Roman victory over the Gauls was celebrated by the building of this triumphal arch. This triumphal arch is identical on both sides. So I'm just going to show you the one side. The only difference is the scene on the top there. This arch was formally dedicated in AD 26, according to what survives of the inscription. That makes this the oldest surviving example of a triumphal arch. There are earlier ones, but none of them do survive. This one does. The broad features are that central wide archway intended for wheeled transport to go through, the smaller side arches which are intended for passenger traffic to go through. It's all dry stone built. The columns, though, are engaged columns, so they're not actually supporting anything. These are purely decorative engaged columns, as you can see in the Corinthian order there. The basic style of this arch we will see being repeated time and time again in other examples, but most obviously in the Arch of Severus at Rome, which dates to around about 200 or so. The arch is very elaborately decorated, and it does have a wonderful example of Julio Claudian frieze, Julian Claudian sculpture. For example, immediately above the side arches, we've got a fairly standard, typical representation of a Roman victory. The trophy we saw on the Gemma Augustea is the normal sign of a victory, but you also find this type of scene, the captured weapons that belong to the tribes that have been defeated. So you've got the shields of the Gauls hanging there, that's a saddle, a horse saddle. You've got a series of trumpets, dragon-headed trumpets there. You've got a boar standard. The boar is a classic symbol in European art, in Iron Age peoples. It's a symbol of bravery. You've got a boar symbol there. You've got another boar figure over here. So this is a fairly typical victory relief scene. The enemy armour, the weapons, the standards, the boar standards and the trumpets. On the top, you've got something which in many ways takes us right back to Aemilius Paulinus' relief at Delphi of 168 or thereabouts. It's a beautiful sculptured frieze showing the battle scene. Now these are in the attic story, the part at the very top of the arch. They are different from one side to the other. Unfortunately, they're not as well preserved as one would like. But broadly speaking, you can see the general details, clearly representing a high point, a peak point in the battle. We can see, obviously, the Gauls are being defeated by the Romans quite definitely there. You've got Roman cavalry in action. The Gauls generally fighting on foot, although in some cases they do seem to be mounted. So it is an example, if you like, of this Roman love of historical reliefs. Art that tells us something, tells us a real story, something that's actually happened rather than allegorical Greek art. We'll show you a gigantomachy, the giants fighting the gods. That's a reference to a victory. You know, we don't actually show you the actual victory scene. At about the same time as that revolt was taking place in Gaul, Tiberius decides that he has to have a new house in Rome. He decides to build something we know as the Domus Tiberiana up here on the Palatine Hill. This is a major break in Roman tradition. What we find under Augustus is Augustus carries on with the normal Roman tradition that a Roman magistrate dealt with politics problems from his private house. There was no specific building for the mayor or the consul of Rome, nothing like a palace or something like that. We can still see the entrance of the house of Augustus on the Palatine Hill. It was preserved as a national monument throughout Roman history. This shows you the entranceway going into it. It's really quite a small house. You can see from the scale there, 10-meter scale. It's the house where Augustus would rule the Roman Empire from. He would meet with his officials in some of these rooms here. He would sleep in some of these rooms. And he ruled the Roman Empire from this place. It was beautifully decorated. This is one of the recently reopened rooms there, and you should of course be able to look at that and immediately say to me, oh, this is a good example of late developed second style. It doesn't have the broad paintings in the panels there, but it's got the large openings, and you've got the architectural elements going up like that. You can see the little candelabra on the top, but also notice the painted ceiling, which is something people tend to forget about. Well, Tiberius decides this is not big enough, and Tiberius in a sense is quite right. I mean, the Roman Empire stretches from Spain to the Euphrates, from west to east. North to south it goes from what is now modern Belgium and France down into Egypt. It's a pretty big empire. So he decides he needs basically an official residence. So he builds the Domus Tiberiana, the house of Tiberius. This is the location of the Domus Tiberiana, up here on the top of the Palatine Hill. There's the Roman Forum. That you should be able to immediately recognize from its plan, with columns going around the back, as being the temple of Castor and Pollux, because it's the only temple like that in the Roman Forum. That's the temple of Vesta. The house of Augustus is here. The Domus Tiberiana is built there, and unfortunately we know very little about it, because it's got a beautiful Renaissance period garden on top of it, the Palazzo Farnese garden. And nobody wants to dig this up, Renaissance period garden, to actually find out what a Domus Tiberiana looks like. So that's, broadly speaking, what you see when you go to see the Domus Tiberiana. But there have been some excavations done on different parts of it, and we've got a pretty good idea of its size. The scale is up there, you can see 75. It's something like 75 meters by 120 meters. In the center of it was a colonnaded open area. We don't really know much about the other buildings out here. A later emperor built that lot going in that direction. But this was the place where Tiberius would sit with his senior officials to look after the government of the Roman Empire. It's on the Palatine Hill. It became known to the people of Rome, generally speaking, as the Palatium, from which we get the word palace, of course. Well, we do know that this was built of brick-faced concrete, marble on the interior walls and probably some of the exterior walls. Other places the walls would have been covered with stucco, that white plaster. We're fortunate in that Tiberius built another brick building at this time, which we can still see, and that's the Castra Praetoria. Tiberius knew that the Roman people didn't like him. He was convinced they were going to rebel against him. Augustus had a bodyguard known as the Praetorian Guard, and a few of them would be in Rome, but most of the Praetorian Guard lived outside of Rome because, by law, no soldiers were allowed in Rome. What Tiberius decided to do is to build a fort for the Praetorian Guard right on the very edge of Rome, the Castra Praetoria. Work starts on this in about AD 21, and we got some idea of the basic shape and the, rather like a typical Roman fort of the period, built of mud brick, opus testaceum. This is a Google type view looking over it. That's the main railway line coming into Rome over there, the railway station just on the edge. But I put this on because this is still the headquarters of the Italian army. So this is a military base that's been a military base for 2,000 years, just about, more or less continuously. But you can also see a large part of the exterior wall still survives. Now, unfortunately, you can see this road here is really a nasty road. You can never get a good photograph across that. But the Castra Praetoria is built of opus testaceum. This is the earliest example we have, dated example we have that we can see of brick-faced concrete. The Tiberian part, incidentally, only goes up to here. Can you just see that little join there, the battlement? Another battlement there, another one there. All that part up there was built in the middle of the 3rd century, so that's actually a later part there. But parts of it, and there's the view looking over that horrible road, parts of the Tiberian gateways have been exposed, and this is the detail of that particular arch coming up there like that. And I want you to notice the carefully moulded brickwork. The point is that this was opus testaceum that was meant to be seen. This was never covered with stucco. This was always seen as a basic brick building. Tiberius knew the people of Rome hated him, and guess what? He didn't like Rome very much either. How am I doing for time, by the way?
21. It's 21.
Oh, well, in that case, we'll carry on. And apart from living on roads for a few years, he was also known for living in different villas or holiday homes in parts of Italy. One of these was on the island of Capri. This was known as the Villa Jovis, the Villa of Jupiter. The more famous one, the one that's just as well preserved, I suppose, in many ways, the one that's mentioned in the textbook is the villa at Sperlonga. Sperlonga, halfway between Rome and Naples. This was one where he spent quite a lot of time. It doesn't survive quite as well as the one on the island of Capri, but this is the one that's produced evidence for something we know Tiberius liked. Roman historians stress how much Tiberius loved being surrounded by statues. His villas were full of statues and artworks. Now remember, from 12 BC, from 6 BC down to about AD 4, he's living on the island of Rhodes. Rhodes, in the Greek-speaking part of the Eastern Empire, a famous centre for artists in the Hellenistic period. So it's probable he develops a liking for Hellenistic art while living on there, while living on Rhodes itself. This is looking down on the villa at Spirlonga, and you can see, broadly speaking, it's a series of rooms around an open courtyard like this. Here we are looking down at closer to it. So you've got an open courtyard, you've got a well going down there. We don't know which room or how the rooms were used, unfortunately. But it's interesting to note that these are built of opus verticulatum. Opus verticulatum, the earliest use of opus verticulatum is in the theatre of Pompey in Rome. But here what we have is a very interesting deliberate effect in opus verticulatum, in which you've got different types of stone being left in layers. This would suggest that these rooms on this side, at least, with this purely decorative approach, never had plaster on the walls at all. They were just left plain in that particular way. And here you have a group that gives you a reasonable idea of the size of what survives there. Well, that's the Villa of Tiberius up here with its courtyard in the centre there. We were just looking at some of these buildings down here. There was a gymnasium attached to it. But the really significant thing about the Spirlonga Villa is what's over here. It's a sea cliff with a natural cave in it. And this area was adapted to form a series of fish ponds, tidal fish ponds, so that you can have a constant supply of fresh fish, not farm fish, because they can swim in and out. It's adapted for an open area dining room, triclinium here, and the cave is adapted to form a wonderful grotto, provided with some incredible statues in it. This is the overhead view, showing you there's the main palace complex, the palace complex, villa complex over there. The present seashore is there. You can see that the tide still comes up to this area, sea still comes up here. So this area here, this would be the fish pond. It was a tidal fish pond, so the water would be constantly refreshed, allowing the fish to develop and grow in there. Looking across that whole area when the tide's coming in a bit, that's the fish pond up there. And this is the actual grotto as it became known, the grotto at Spirlonga. One part of this fish pond complex is made very regular. You can see the runoff channel there for the water to come in. It has a little island on it with another enclosed fish pond next to that. And this was clearly laid out as a triclinium, as a place for some people to sit in the open air and enjoy their meal. That's looking over the basic fish pond there. This is the area we're now concentrating on, this triclinium, that particular part there. We can only imagine what takes place there, but it's logical to assume that this is laid out for the normal 3 couches for a Roman meal, usually with 3 men on each couch. You can imagine a little wooden footbridge being put over there for the emperor to sit here, or rather to recline here on his left arm with his friends, enjoying a nice meal while looking towards the grotto. Why looking towards the grotto? Well, the grotto was carefully modified on one side to produce a little square recess area, which was probably for an orchestra. It's got a little kind of raised stage area coming up. I said square, circular area, raised staged area going up like that. So you can imagine the emperor sitting there, music playing away, lights, torches, action, all that type of thing. In the 18th century, 19th century, they started to excavate inside the grotto over here, and what they found was this other part, which had been covered up thanks to earthquake activity and rocks falling in from the roof of the grotto. They found this amazing collection of statuary, 2 different sets of statuary. One of these, badly fragmented, it must have been broken up, pieces taken away, probably in the medieval period, represents a story from the Odyssey, the blinding of Polyphemus. Polyphemus is a giant who captures Odysseus. He's one-eyed giant. He won't let Odysseus and his friends go. Odysseus works out a plan whereby they get him completely drunk, and then they stab him in his single eye with a large spear. Polyphemus, by the way, by this time has already killed some of Odysseus' friends and companions. So this is what we've got here, the blinding of Polyphemus. Another detailed shot. There's Odysseus at the top, guiding the spear into the one eye of Polyphemus. You can get some idea of the size of this from that human hand over the hand of Polyphemus. And here's Polyphemus himself. Odysseus, as shown in the textbook, and also a colour photograph to one side. There was another group of statuary here, which seems to have been in this area. It's not quite clear where exactly it was. This again is a scene from the Odyssey. In this case, the Scylla group. When Odysseus passes between Sicily and Italy, there's the sea monster, the Scylla, who tries to come out and kill all his companions. This particular group of statue has got the names of the makers on it: Athenodorus, Hagisandros and Polydorus, and they're all from Rhodes, which is where Tiberius spent his exile. Well, you can just see the end of a ship there, Odysseus' ship, and you can see the helmsman, the steerman, about to fall overboard. There he is, the top of his head missing. This is the piece from the other side, in which you can see one of Odysseus' men, the sea monster, has got its tentacles wrapped around his face, dragging him below the surface. Restored appearance would have been something like this. You've got the Scylla, the sea monster there, all these various companions of Odysseus being pulled down by the sea monster into the ocean. This is an example of Hellenistic Baroque, but Roman period Hellenistic Baroque. The basic idea for this type of sculpture goes back to the late 3rd century. Late 3rd century, the great altar of Pergamum, which we've already seen. But again, to make this point about this enormous emphasis in this Hellenistic Baroque on showing facial details very clearly, showing body movement very carefully, very full moulding of the body, very different from what we have in earlier periods. The Dying Gaul, a Roman copy of a bronze statue at Pergamon, made in the 3rd century, the same type of Hellenistic Baroque. We know that the same guys that made the Scylla group in Sperlonga made a statue of the Laocoon from the story of the Trojan War. This is the only Laocoon we have. It's found at Rome, front and the back view. We don't know if it was made by them. This one probably came from Nero's palace, but it could have been made under Tiberius. But again, I want to emphasize this sort of detailed work, very deep detailed work, sense of agony in this Hellenistic Baroque. But I also, of course, have to bring in these two. Found in the sea off Ponte Epiferiano. Unfortunately, that part of the body was buried in the sand. The top part was not. So destroyed by sea worm activity. That's what's in the textbook. And The blinding of Polyphemus was a very popular subject. The 2 examples at Ephesus. Blinding of Polyphemus. There's Polyphemus. There's the spear being carried. There's Odysseus. He's up there with his one eye. And now it's time to stop. I've gone slightly over time. I knew I was going to go over time today. Da-da, da-da, da-da.